Welcome to the Simply Jenna podcast. This is Breaking the Stigma, a special mini-series. Join us as we interview different people and talk about their journey to wellness. If you have thought about getting support but were afraid, or are afraid of what others might think, this series is for you. Stay tuned for some really good stories. This is episode 3 with Rob as part of his journey. So as a word of caution for this episode, again, we continue the conversation about suicide. So if that doesn't fit for your life right now, or you are uncomfortable with this topic, please stop this episode now and refer to our show notes where you can find some resources for support. This is part 3. Welcome back, Rob. So if you can catch us up to where we left off on the last episode, please.
Sure. Yeah, I had said before I was with my boys on our annual water park road trip, and we just crossed into Washington State to go stay with some dear friends down there. But that is unfortunately when I got a call that my estranged wife Jen had committed suicide, and just it was as you can imagine, a whirlwind of emotion trying to absorb and understand and take in that information and knowledge, and just how to try and process it.
Right. So at that time, were you informed of any details regarding the suicide and what had happened?
I had heard from my eldest stepdaughter's father that he knew that she had completed suicide. But I later, as I was driving from Costco, as I had said, where I found out, to my friend's place, that the RCMP who had been called in to do the welfare check, he contacted me directly and informed me that she had committed suicide by hanging. So the same as her mother.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was really shocking, especially as I'd said in the prior episode, how when Jen, I think it was the prior one or the first one, where Jen had said that when she found out how her mother committed suicide, that there's no way that she could ever do that to her family and that she could never do such a thing. It struck me as just bizarre and surreal that she would do it the exact same way. To that end, if you fast forward for a little minute here, when I finally got back home and was able to see my therapist and talk about this, I relayed to my therapist how perplexed I was that she would do it the exact same way. Like, it was just so bewildering to me.
Yeah.
And her comment to me was just that, well, her mother had shown her a way that worked.
Right.
And that if Jen was in such a bad place, that her mom showed her that that was one way that you could effectively complete suicide.
Right.
Wow.
Which, it made sense, theoretically, what she was saying, but I still just couldn't wrap my head around it, given that there was 4 little children who were left behind as a result.
Right.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So speaking of the children, you had just gotten this news about Jen. How did you go about telling your little dudes about what had happened?
As you can imagine, it was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just a surreal moment. I use that word a lot in these podcasts, but there's really no better way to say it. I kept up appearances with our family friends, like I'd said, and my sons. And then that night, I just couldn't sleep. I was just so emotionally wrecked trying to wrap my head around this whole thing, and took to Google, and but with the sole purpose of trying to understand, how do you tell your children this?
Yeah.
Right.
How do you say this? What do you say? What do you not say?
Right.
The one thing that was really important that I really want to highlight for everybody was that when Jen's mom committed suicide, she told her daughters that she died in her sleep. So she lied about it.
Right.
The unfortunate thing was that there was a night where my eldest stepdaughter had overheard us talking about it, and she found out that way that her grandmother had committed suicide. She didn't know how, but understood that it wasn't from committing suicide or completing suicide, but from dying in her sleep. It was from completing suicide.
Right.
So the one thing that I found on the amazing therapeutic web of Google was that you don't lie.
Yes. Yeah.
You don't necessarily, and I would definitely not recommend it, we don't go into the gory details of everything,
Yeah.
but you don't lie about it. So with that, I kept from my sons the information that their mother had completed suicide until we got home.
Okay.
The biggest reason being that I knew that I wasn't emotionally strong enough to deal with that by myself.
Right.
And that I would need the support of my mom and the boys' godparents, who are amazing. And I called them ahead of time to make sure that they were able to be there on the Sunday after we got back to support me in telling my sons that their mother had died.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did you break the news to them? How did you frame it for them?
There's so much talk of cancer in this day and age, and has been for years, that it's a known enough thing, and my sons were aware of it enough that I framed it like a cancer. And what I told them was that their mother was very sick in her brain, and that, like cancer, if you don't try to fix it and try and get help and try and do the steps you need to do to make it better, that it will kill you. And I told them that their mom did not take any steps or make any effort to get any help or medicine, if you will, for her brain, and that her brain told her that she shouldn't live anymore. Absolutely the hardest day of my life. My youngest son didn't understand. He was 4.
Right.
I shouldn't say that. He understood but didn't comprehend, I think, is probably the better way to say it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
My eldest son, the problem was that I was trying so hard to stay composed before I told them. And I had moments of just starting to like hyperventilate, cry before I told them, just knowing how hard this would be and how much it would hurt them, because you'd never want to hurt your kids.
Of course.
And but when I started to try and tell them, I just exploded. And my eldest son just looked at me with very pleading eyes and scared eyes, because he'd never seen me so upset before. Excuse me. And knew that something was really wrong. But I eventually got it out, and he was very upset. And I just sat beside him, and they both just hugged me as tight as they could. My eldest was crying his brains out, and my youngest was just, I think he was there more to support me than him.
Aww.
But it was, by far and away the worst day of my life. But I wanted to be honest. I didn't want to make the mistake that we had made with Corey, and I wanted them to understand that she was sick.
Yes.
And she truly was.
Yeah.
And that it was her, albeit incorrect, decision to not get help and try and get better.
Right.
Yeah.
I cannot even begin to imagine how difficult
No.
that conversation must have been for
Yeah.
you and for those poor little pumpkins to hear that news.
Yeah, you never want to hurt your kids, right?
Absolutely.
that's right.
Yeah. but like you did the right thing. You were truthful, and you shared the right information for them at an age appropriate level so that they could understand what had happened, and that it was because she was sick, and that is the truth, right? So now you were left with, I'm assuming playing a part in the funeral and being a part of that process. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the problem was that my two stepdaughters' fathers lived out of town. And so I took to looking after the funeral preparations. I'm very fortunate that one of my dear friends is, a key owner of a funeral home in Calgary, and he was very amazing, and his whole family was amazing in helping and supporting me through this and holding my hand, honestly, quite literally, and through this whole process, because never been through it before, really. And yeah, it was hard. The unfortunate thing, I guess, unfortunate, is that law dictates that somebody needs to identify that the funeral home has the correct person in their care.
Right.
And because I lived there, I had to go and identify Jen's body to make sure that they had the correct individual in their care. And that was extremely difficult. Other than pictures and stuff, I've never seen a dead person before.
Right.
And to see Jen lying there was, I'll use my word again, surreal. Like it dropped me to my knees. I started crying, and I just kept saying to her, we could have worked this out. We could have figured stuff out. Not meaning our relationship, but just meaning that it shouldn't have had to get to that.
Right.
So, anyway, got through that tough experience, and then there was the funeral itself, and that was very hard. Hadn't seen my stepdaughters in a while, and I remember everybody came to my house, and we all went in a giant Mercedes limo bus thing down to the funeral from my home. And it was very hard to see my stepdaughters. As soon as we locked eyes, we just collapsed. And sorry.
It's okay. Take your time.
It's just hard to comfort them through that.
Right.
How do you?
Yeah.
So it was a hard day, and I had the lady that presided over the funeral read what I had to say, because there was no way I had the ability to do anything other than sit there and try and stay somewhat upright for my sons.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was interesting in that she just told me to focus on what I wanted to say and what my message would be to Jen. And it gave me a lot of time and some evenings to reflect on what I would say. And very hard to compose the words that I did, because despite all the anger and resentment that I had towards her for everything that she had done in destroying our family with the affair and breaking our family apart, I was left with the fact that I still loved her. And she gave me my two amazing little dudes, and without her I wouldn't have them, and they're my everything. And so that was the backbone of the message that I sent to her at the funeral, was just that thank you for letting me understand a different kind of love, and a love that involved creating human beings, and two amazing little human beings, and having my other two stepdaughters in my life and giving me those life experiences. So yeah, it was a very hard day. My youngest son I don't know that he fully understood. He knew that his mom had passed, but he just saw everybody around him very upset. So he was teary just because I think everybody else was, and especially because he looked up at me and just saw tears going down my face. And my eldest son, though, he was having a very hard time with it and just clamped onto me very tightly as we went through the celebration of her life. And I remember distinctly after, when I was thanking people for coming, that there was a slideshow that we had up of all these pictures of her, and he was sitting by himself, just watching it, remembering those moments, because there's a number of pictures of him with her, so it gave him a chance to kind of, I guess, reflect on that and see it. But anyway, so there's a number of people that came out to support me and our family, and which was great. It was a nice send off for Jen that way. And one person in particular who made it was a dear childhood friend of hers that Jen had unfortunately ostracized a number of years ago. And she had messaged me on Facebook Messenger or whatever, just saying that she and her sister were coming and hoped that we could connect, because we literally hadn't spoken in probably 10 years. And that was great. It was great to see her, and naturally there was lots of hugs and everything at the ceremony. And so after that, she and her sister had to fly back to BC, but their flight wasn't for several hours, so I just suggested that they come back to the house and have dinner with us and be able to kind of see the boys. But but there was a bomb that was dropped that just changed everything. And we were talking and just reflecting on everything. And, because her Jen and her friend had a falling out many, many moons ago, back at the beginning of our relationship, and just started kind of talking about that, and she just felt really bad. She's like, I feel like I need to tell you something, but I don't know if now's the right time or what. And I just asked her to carry on. And as it turned out, that Jen had been kind of simmering the affair that she ultimately had with this guy back when we first started seeing each other.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was kind of my reaction. Maybe a little more amplified than that.
Yeah.
But the hard part was that it completely changed my emotion at the time, from sadness and lament for a relationship that had failed and whatever, to just anger. That I felt like I was living a lie. I lived a lie for 7 years. It really hurt. I mean, I was glad I knew.
Yeah.
It's just better to know the truth than to be blinded with lies. But it was it was a very hard pill to swallow.
Such a big shift from just, prior in the day, really grieving that relationship and really holding on to this thought that, like maybe things could have shifted for you guys if you had a chance to work it through. And then to find out, this traumatizing information that, the relationship wasn't what you thought it was.
Yeah, it was an epic roller coaster of emotion that day, for sure.
Absolutely.
Especially after that.
Okay, so you're working your way through processing what was happening with the loss of Jen. So who in the family then, obviously, you had your experiences of going to therapy and counseling. Did you give any thought to who might also in your family benefit from counseling after processing this event that happened with Jen? And who did you think might benefit from getting some help?
Well, the short answer is everybody.
Right.
I didn't have any sort of say or control over my stepdaughters, but my sons for sure. And my friend who runs the funeral home was amazing in not only suggesting and promoting, but recommending therapy for my sons in particular. And he recommended me to the Children's Cottage, which is now the Children's Grief Center, who focus on therapy for children who've experienced loss and trauma. And so I immediately contacted them, and I got both my sons in to see them, and they were nothing short of amazing. That I couldn't recommend them any more highly than I am now. Like, they're just they were incredibly considerate, very very skilled in talking with and dealing with and getting through to children. It was excellent.
Oh, that's fantastic.
There's such a good resource here in Calgary for our community, for those that are grieving. And yeah, they give them nothing but accolades for what they're doing for our community. So how did the counseling go for the kids?
It was to be brief, it was polar opposites. My youngest was very resistant. He was very defiant. He didn't want to go. He didn't like it.
Yeah.
He would want me to go into the session with him, which was fine. But he would literally arms crossed, closed body language. It was very hard. He just didn't want to talk about anything. My eldest, on the other hand, though, he was embracing it like a kid would candy. He welcomed it. He had an amazing therapist there. He actually went through a couple of therapists just because changes and stuff over time, but all of them were incredible. And he would ask me about when he was going next, and he was looking forward to it. And he would tell me that he's like, I need to see my therapist.
Wow.
Excellent.
Yeah. So he really embraced it, which was amazing, because he was the one on the exterior anyway that was having the hardest time with it, with the loss of his mom. So yeah, we went, the boys went once a week. After a period of time with my youngest, there was a point where the therapist is just like, I don't want to, in quotes, waste your money. She's like, he's just not ready to open. So there's no point in you coming back and with him and bringing him here, because he's just not prepared to do this right now. So
was there a moment in time where you felt like, okay, now I think he's ready?
Well, fast forward a year. Sorry, this is a very... Sorry. It's hard to talk about. Quite literally a year later, we were on our annual water park road trip again. And as timelines and irony would have it, we were at my dear friend's home, where who I saw immediately after I found out that Jen had completed suicide. And I'd contacted them ahead of time to ask them if it'd be okay if we did a ceremony, because they live on an island off the coast of Washington, and they literally own property right to the water's edge. And they replied saying they'd be more than honored to be a part of that. And for context, when at Jen's funeral, we had her cremated, and we had 4 little pods made up with some of her ashes in them that were the water disposable, soluble type that would dissolve in the water if you want. And Jen's thing was that she loved the water and wanted to be put to rest there. And then her main ashes were in a main, bigger water soluble urn. So we went out there, and I took my sons, and my friends came with us, thank goodness, because I needed that support. I was dreading, honestly, the ceremony. Because emotionally it was very tough. And we went down with the pods to the water's edge. It's a beautiful, beautiful sunset on the in the sound there, and just said some words to my sons and just saying that this is what their mom wanted, and that she always wanted her ashes to be spread in water in the ocean, and that they needed to throw their pods into the water. My eldest was upset but keen to honor her wishes, and my youngest just was very hesitant and very quiet, which was weird. For reference, he hadn't expressed any emotion at all. He hadn't cried about her. He hadn't talked about her, really, other than just matter-of-factly saying that she had passed away, whereas my eldest son had been very emotional and had many crying moments about his mom's passing up and over this period of this year. And anyway, my youngest, eventually I was with him, and he threw her pod into the ocean, and then he just completely collapsed and sat on my lap crying hard for a good 5 minutes, like hyperventilating, crying. He was just so upset, and it just completely shattered me because I'd never seen him that upset in my life. And it was a bittersweet moment just because he had never shown any emotion up until this point about his mom's passing, which was hard for me and worrying that he was internalizing his feelings,
Right.
which is my biggest fear for any of my kids,
Yeah.
and not getting their feelings out, which I talked about a lot. So it was a relief as a parent to see him have this massive release about his mom, but still it's hard to see your kids so upset.
Of course.
I can't even imagine how heartbreaking and emotional that would have been for all of you at that time.
It was very hard, and my friends are older than me, and my friend's wife, she is the proverbial grandmother, and it was really sweet that he walked with her and held her hand and just basically sat in her lap the whole night and just reading stories. And then ultimately I curled up with my two boys in bed, and yeah, it was a very hard day, but a necessary day. They needed that closure.
Absolutely.
And it was honestly a relief to see my little guy have that exhale of emotion that I think he'd been harboring inside for so long. Yeah.
And it's so wonderful that he had a safe space where he could do that with
Yeah.
having the people that he loves the most around him
Yeah.
to help him process those emotions, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
It was honestly, in retrospect, it was perfect.
yeah.
It couldn't have been a more perfect setting. Jen would have loved it. And I'm just so thankful for my friends that were willing and keen to be a part of that process.
So fast forward a few years then. How are your little dudes doing today?
My little guy is doing well. He's in school now full time and doing great. He makes friends really well. He talks openly about his feelings, so far anyway. He doesn't really talk about his mom much at all. I don't know if that's a blessing just because of how young he was at the time, but
Right.
that may change, of course, as he gets older. My eldest, though, he was still going through therapy, after we got back, and was getting a lot of good tools and skills, and was doing okay. And he started school, and then things kind of took a turn for the worst. There was a particular kid at his school. I'll take this back a sec. He was very open about talking about his the loss of his mom. I think he got that from the fact that I was very open in talking about what happened with him, that he felt comfortable saying that his mom had passed away. Unfortunately, there was a kid in his class who was a bit malicious and basically was that his mom wasn't really dead. Also saying to kids on the playground that his mom had been murdered and all sorts of incredibly awful things. Unfortunately, he didn't say anything to me about this for a period of time because he was focused on trying to be strong and be independent, not relying on his dad. And the problem that I started to get, though, is I was getting calls from the school, was acting out, and he was throwing things in the classroom. He was slamming doors, leaving the classroom without permission. Very untoward behavior for him. Anyway, he eventually told me what was going on. And so then I had to engage the principal and his teacher and just say that this needed to stop. And the hard part was that these words from this kid just completely derailed all of his therapy. His nightmares came back with a vengeance. He was sick to his stomach to the point of vomiting, that I was going to abandon him or leave and never come back, that something was going to happen to me. He would wake up in the middle of the night trying to find me, and if for some reason I was either not in my room because I was watching a show or I was in the bathroom, he would get so anxious that he would curl himself up on the stair landing, crying hysterically, screaming my name, wondering where I was.
Oh my goodness.
Or there's a number of times that he sleptwalked to the garage to make sure that the car was there.
Oh my God.
So it really, this kid's words and actions really, really, really did a number on him. And I had to get him back into the children's cottage initially, weekly, immediately. And then ultimately we had to do a different kind of therapy at a different institution for the coping with the bullying aspect.
Right.
Yeah, it's so interesting that, like you can do, a bunch of work, but, at the end of the day, we are still all human beings, right? And words truly do have an impact. And, for us as parents or guardians or caregivers, to really educate and take time on, telling our kids that, words have an impact and to treat each other with kindness and respect and, to just really, you never know what somebody is going through, and to really operate with that as the forefront in your thought. And, but yeah, and unfortunately for your son, he suffered the repercussions of bullying, and, unfortunately it is happening more often than not. But I think, as a collective, hopefully we can all make an effort to educate our kids, if we are parents or caregivers, to truly just lead with kindness and to never know what somebody's story is or how your words might impact somebody else, right? So for yourself, what did you do for your counseling? Are you still going? Where are you at?
Absolutely. After I was still seeing my therapist up until the point of this bullying incident. And then after that happened, my therapy also increased in frequency. Because this was a whole other new skill set that I needed tools for, because it was one thing dealing with loss, but now with bullying, which was it wasn't completely foreign to me, as I endured some of that with my eldest stepdaughter being bullied a bit, but not like this. And so between not having the tools to try and help my son, but also to help myself, and skills for being so exhausted because he would come and wake me up in the middle of the night frequently, terrified. Yeah. So, I was back in very full throes with my therapist, seeing her very frequently.
Right.
And so where are you at now, emotionally and psychologically?
They talk about, I don't know, what is it, the 7 stages of grief or something? I don't know how many stages there's supposed to be.
Yeah.
I've been through all those. And, but for me, and everybody's different, I haven't gone through and completed them. The hard part is that I still get these moments of anger and bitterness towards Jen, honestly, very much out of the blue. And where I just am so mad and just, enraged that she did what she did to our family, to our kids, not only in terms of killing our marriage, but also in her suicide. And I really struggled with that, because I'm sure anybody who is listening that has gone through anything like this, in terms of a bitter divorce or breakup or whatever, that if your armchair psychologist friends or whatever who would say, until you let it go, you're not going to get any better.
Right.
And I mentioned this to my therapist actually not that long ago, just saying that, asking her, like, does this mean that I'm stuck? Like, am I spinning my wheels? Am I in this perpetual kind of, in quotes, hell, and will never get better? And her advice shocked me, but made a lot of sense. And she just said that, you went through a lot of hardship, and to not honor that is not being honest. And that you should absolutely acknowledge the fact that you were, in quotes, screwed over, that you were hard done by, that you were wronged, because you were, and that it is who you are today. And it is a reminder to yourself to look after yourself and to protect yourself and take care of yourself. And so she said, it's not bad to feel anger and resentment towards somebody who has done something so awful to you. You need to honor the fact that you feel that emotion, and honor that emotion and respect it, and that you don't ignore it. And honestly, that has helped me tenfold.
Yeah.
Because that was one key thing in my journey that I've been on that I've really struggled with, because of that philosophy that until you forgive and forget, that you're not going to move on.
Right.
And I would 1000% disagree with that.
Yeah.
For me.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
I'm
even
not saying it's correct.
yeah, and even like what you said about your boys in the beginning is that, one of your deepest fears is, the repression of feelings and not being able to talk about how you feel. So, essentially what your therapist told you is the same thing in a different way, is that, to really honor what you're feeling and to be able to talk about it, and to not feel like you should be at a certain place emotionally, at a certain time, because that's what society asks of you, or that's the pressure that we put on ourselves as human beings. That, the most important thing is to really just, focus on your own feelings and where you're at in your own process and your own journey. And that's what's most important. And that's what creates the healing that we all need. Right? Yeah.
It's a feeling that, or it's a stigma that it's inappropriate.
Right. Yeah.
And it was honestly a very elevating and relieving moment with her saying that that's not the case.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. So, speaking of stigma, Why do you think that there's a stigma with getting mental health support?
There's, I think, a couple of pieces to it. One would be our parents and grandparents' influences and philosophies that, in quotes, back in the day, like certainly when I was a kid, that if you had to go see a therapist, there was something truly incredibly wrong with you, like you were an axe murderer or you were schizophrenic or whatever.
Right.
Like there was something incredibly clinically wrong with you.
Right.
I don't think that that's fully evaporated. I would argue that it's better these days than when I was a kid, but there is that element too. The problem, I think, is that when you go to, say, a friend or a family member or whatever, with whatever you are struggling with, whatever it may be, there's a fear of judgment.
Yeah.
And there's a fear of that it's not, that person or those people may not be a safe place for you to relay your concerns, your fears, your issues, whatever they may be.
Right.
The value that I definitely got from my therapist or therapists over the years is that I could go there, speak freely, and I could absolutely open up. That being said, there are a number of therapists out there, and not every one of them is going to be a good fit.
Yeah.
Right.
You need to find someone that you gel with, that is wired the way that you're wired, is going to approach the way you want it to be approached. And I, in between Corey, my mother-in-law, committing suicide, and Jen committing suicide, I had a therapist when my main therapist was away on sick leave who was absolutely awful. She was very opinionated and introduced her own particular value system into our conversation, and it was very unproductive.
Right.
So the thing is, though, that if I had stopped my therapy journey at that point because of that bad experience, coping with what I had to go through with Jen's suicide and my son's working through their own therapy and their struggles, I would have been at a loss.
Right.
So the one word of words of encouragement I would give anybody who's listening is that if you happen to go and take the step of seeing a therapist and they're not a fit for you, find someone else. There are so many therapists out there, and I'm sure you'll speak to how there's different approaches that therapists will take.
Yep.
And you just have to find the right one, and there will be the right one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think, we've chatted about that in previous podcast episodes where we've spoken to the importance of finding a good fit with a therapist if you are seeking that help, and how important that relationship is.
Yes.
You're in a space where you're being very vulnerable, as you've mentioned, Rob, and you are looking for a space that is judgment free, and you want to have that. You want to feel like you have that connection with your therapist. So it's so important to have that. So one thing that we wanted to ask you about is related to, having this conversation about suicide is obviously very challenging and complex. And thinking about stigma and sort of stigma associated with suicide. Do you think that there is a stigma for those folks that are left behind after somebody has completed a suicide? And we're talking about sort of along the lines of, do you think that people judge and have a conception that maybe there's more that could have been done in a situation where a person has completed suicide?
Yes. Simple answer. Unless you've lived through it or have, by maybe a degree of removal, lived through it, it's still, and so sadly it's more common than it used to be, but it's still very uncommon, thank goodness. And I think people just don't know, and even I can say this, I don't know how you get there. How does life get so bad that is your only alternative? And in terms of people looking at me or talking to me about this, the questions often arise is like, how did you not see it coming?
Right.
Weren't there any signs? Like, didn't she talk about it?
Yeah.
To sound more callous and mean, like, what did you do? Did you do something to promote this, to create this, to necessitate this? Like, and it's just because people don't know. There's a naivete there. Which can also just be an outright ignorance.
Yeah.
That they just don't get it. And I've lived through 2 of these, and I just don't get it.
Right.
So just because you've had to endure it doesn't mean you understand it. And I, as a person, can't ever see myself being in a place that I could get to that point.
Right.
I understand how my stepmother Corey and how Jen could have seen that as their only option. But there was an alternative, and they just didn't go there. But I digress. To get back to your original question, I would say yes. And my son's school is a point, like that kid who was ignorant and making those comments. Your mom's not really dead. Like, he can't, as much as I have an immense amount of anger and hatred towards that child for what he's done to my son, I respect the fact how he doesn't get it.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah.
He obviously hasn't had to endure this with a family member or a friend, and just can't wrap his head around it. And honestly, I don't know that anybody can, except for those who are in that incredibly negative headspace.
And I think that really speaks to, the resiliency of human beings, Rob, given what you've gone through and what you've experienced. And, yet you choose to continue to fight and to, wage this battle, fight for your sons and, fight for your own mental health and your own stability, that, we are resilient as human beings. And, you have gone through, unfortunately, 2 completed suicides, and, still there's that unknowingness and that not understanding, and rightfully so. But, as human beings, we are so resilient. And the message really is that, there is a way. There is a way to figure things out, and there is a solution. And it doesn't matter, how hard things are, how hard things may seem. But there is a solution, and we can choose to fight. And we just need to find the right support system to get there.
There's always hope.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And, so I just really want to highlight, Rob, your strength and your continued choice to keep waging this battle. And, no matter how hard it gets, is that you keep fighting and you keep making that choice to fight. So I just really, really, really want to, highlight how incredible you are to continue to do that, and, and to continue being a role model for your children, and to have the value of mental health and physical health, and encouraging that in your home, as a means of protection, but also as a means of, this is what a good, healthy life is, right? So good on you.
Yeah. And we've talked about this sort of outside of recording for the podcast, but how incorporating the mental health piece along with your physical health piece, and making that a part of the picture, as you're saying, Jenna, that's fantastic, Rob, that you've been able to make that a part of your life, that it is just as equally as important, and it is a part of our general lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one. Thank you for your comments. It's been a hell of a journey, but it's also been a hell of an epiphany to understand how understated mental health really is.
Right.
Honestly,
Yeah.
you see so much in the media about, and all the advertising of eating well, working out, like, exercising, all that stuff. And you just don't see that with the mental piece, but the mental piece is so critical because it's your brain it controls everything.
Right.
And it's grossly understated how, and through all this, if there's one thing I can say is I underestimated, and I now greatly appreciate how incredibly important your mental health is and how important it is to make sure you keep up on that as well as your nutrition and your physical health.
Yeah.
They're all so intimately intertwined.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, given everything you've gone through, I'm going to ask you for one official statement of, what would be the lesson learned for you throughout all of this?
The lesson learned, I guess, would be the thing I learned about myself is that maybe I didn't understand myself and who I really was as a person. We all have our history and our skeletons, if you want to call it that, and things that we've gone through our childhood. And, as I've shared with you, Jen and Corey definitely had their share of very hard ones. And, like I said, prior to Corey committing suicide, I never had therapy.
Right.
And as I said, I was a very strong, capable person. I could handle anything that life threw at me, whatever. But I would argue in my beautiful hindsight that I didn't know who I was as a person.
Right.
And I know through this adversity, I definitely have a greater understanding of myself, but it's only through going through this adversity, and especially through the therapy that's helped me heal or continue healing, that I understand that I'm a product of my upbringing and environment. And the reason I got into, in quotes, this situation is just a function of that. And there could be an argument, I'd say there's a very strong argument to say that if I had been to therapy, but prior to any of this adversity, that I would have had a greater understanding of who I am as a person, an understanding of how and what kind of relationships I would be drawn and inclined to enter into as a result.
Right. So that piece of really understanding who we are
Yep.
as individual people, how our experiences that we've gone through really impact our day-to-day decisions. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the big thing I'd want to highlight is that you don't need to see a therapist because something's wrong.
Right.
It's good to just have somebody to talk to, just to bounce things off, not unlike you would bounce things off a friend. And when they tell you you have a conversation with them, you may have some epiphanies with them.
Right. Yeah.
And they highlight something you didn't even think of. Well, therapists are trained in exactly that. And their job and their skill set is to actually draw out those epiphanies that you wouldn't otherwise realize. And I think if I could do it all over again, I would have seen a therapist many years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, for taking the time to record these episodes with us and to share your story and to really highlight to everyone that's listening, again, the resiliency of a human being. After everything you've gone through, you made that decision to share your story and to educate our listeners and to spread the knowledge of the importance of getting the support that you need, no matter how tough things get, that there is a way out and there is a solution and there is support out there to help you. So thank you. Thank you so much for continuing to battle this path that you're on and to choose, helping others. So thank you. And thank you for sharing with us your journey. We so appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you, Rob.
My absolute pleasure.
So we're going to close with a quote that Rob chose. This quote comes from Prince. Always cry for love, never cry for pain. Thank you for listening to this episode. I wanted to share some important information before we let you go. While this podcast will give you strategies to use in your life, it is certainly not a replacement for attending therapy or seeking your own support. There will always be limits to what we can do on our own when it comes to mental health. And while we can give you tools and strategies, we know that they will not always work for everyone. There is value in telling your story and being heard. If you have tried the strategies we discussed and you're still feeling stuck, please reach out to us at Simply Counseling Services. Visit our website at www.simplycounselingservices.com for the services we offer and to learn about the other services that are free. You can also submit your topic ideas for this podcast on this website as well. Thank you again for joining us, and we are looking forward to our next time together. Take care of yourself.